The sky above Earth had changed. In a matter of hours, the once peaceful expanse was now filled with hundreds of colossal alien ships, their dark silhouettes blocking out the sun. The invaders, known as the HFY, had arrived. Their ships, massive and foreboding, were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Each one was adorned with glowing alien symbols, and their engines hummed with a power that made the air tremble. They came from a distant galaxy, a race of conquerors that had decimated countless worlds. Their weapons were said to be capable of turning entire cities to ash with a single blast, and their technology was far more advanced than anything Earth had ever developed. It didn't take long for the world to realize that the peaceful era of Earth's history was over. Governments scrambled to react, sending frantic messages to one another and rallying their military forces. It wasn't enough. The alien fleet was far too powerful, their presence too overwhelming. Within hours of their arrival, the first major cities were destroyed by devastating energy blasts from the invader ships. Earth's defenses, which had always been focused on defense from natural disasters or rogue states, were no match for an enemy with technology so far beyond their own. People around the world watched in horror as the invaders' ships moved into Earth's atmosphere, preparing for a ground assault. The message from the HFY was clear: submission or destruction. There was no room for negotiation, no hope for peace. The HFY had come to take Earth, to claim it as their own. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, leaders from every nation met in urgent session. The air was thick with fear and disbelief. Military advisors and scientists argued about how to respond, but everyone knew the truth. Earth stood no chance against the overwhelming might of the HFY fleet. Are we really going to let them destroy us without even trying? Admiral John Harrow stood at the edge of the room, his voice cutting through the confusion. His eyes were cold and sharp, his jaw clenched. Harrow was a man of action, not words, and he wasn't willing to accept defeat. A senior officer looked at him skeptically. "Admiral, we've been monitoring their ships. They're impervious to our weapons. We're talking about a species that can wipe out entire planets. How do you propose we fight back against that?" Harrow's gaze remained steady. "We don't fight them in the way they expect. We use everything we have, our ingenuity, our will to survive. If they want to underestimate us, then let them. We'll show them what it means to face humanity when we've been pushed to the edge." The room fell silent. The truth of his words was undeniable. Despite the overwhelming odds, there was something about Harrow's conviction that stirred a spark of hope. The world needed a plan, an idea that could turn the tide. Outside the United Nations building, the city was in chaos. People filled the streets, watching the sky with a mixture of awe and terror. The HFY ships loomed, hovering silently above them, their engines whirring with an eerie hum. The future of humanity rested on a knife's edge, and no one knew what would happen next. But in the shadows, something else was unfolding. A small fleet of ships, unlike anything the HFY had seen, was being assembled in secret. These ships weren't just built for war. They were built for survival, for retaliation. The world had been preparing for this moment in ways the invaders could never have imagined. And so, as the HFY descended toward Earth, they unknowingly faced a force that was ready to strike back, a force that was determined to show them just how dangerous humanity could be when cornered. The storm had arrived, but humanity wasn't ready to bow down without a fight. The first wave of HFY ships descended like a dark cloud, their massive forms blotting out the sun. From Earth's surface, they seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, their hulls gleaming with alien energy. The invaders were confident. Their weapons, far superior to anything humanity had, were poised to wipe out any resistance. They had destroyed civilizations with ease before, and Earth would be no different. What the HFY didn't know, however, was that Earth had a hidden ace, a fleet that had been built in secret over the past 2 decades. While the rest of the world watched in horror as the alien armada approached, a group of nations had quietly pooled their resources, hoping that one day they could prepare for such an invasion. And now, the day had come. At a classified military base, deep beneath the mountains, Admiral John Harrow stood before a vast holographic map, studying the positions of the HFY fleet. His mind raced with strategies and possibilities, but there was one key advantage that would determine the success or failure of the human response: Earth's secret fleet. "All systems are online," said Commander Elena Alvarez, Harrow's right hand and the mastermind behind the human fleet's development. Her voice was steady, though she could not hide the tension in her eyes. "We're ready to deploy." Harrow nodded, his expression grim. "It's time. Let's give them a show they won't forget." With a single command, the hidden fleet was deployed. Unlike the giant, imposing ships of the HFY, the human fleet was sleek and agile, designed for mobility and flexibility rather than sheer firepower. These ships were a combination of human ingenuity, Earth's natural resources, and reverse-engineered technology from captured alien craft. Their hulls shimmered with a strange energy field that seemed to pulse with life, and their weapons were designed to be unpredictable, as the humans knew that the HFY relied on predictable tactics. The human ships shot up into the sky, slicing through the atmosphere like sharp knives cutting through cloth. As they emerged from the clouds, they formed up into tight, coordinated groups, each ship moving with a level of precision that seemed impossible given their size. The HFY fleet, still in the process of organizing their next strike, didn't immediately detect the threat. They had assumed that the Earth's only response would be to deploy old, outdated military assets, maybe some missiles, perhaps a few airstrikes. But the reality was far different. The first encounter came just minutes after the human ships had emerged from the clouds. The HFY ships, still hovering above the planet in a leisurely formation, were taken completely by surprise when the human fleet struck. The humans didn't attack head-on. Instead, they used the terrain and Earth's natural resources to their advantage. As the HFY ship's sensors tried to track the human ships, they found themselves caught in a magnetic storm caused by Earth's ionosphere. The humans had specifically designed their ships to harness this natural phenomenon, and the result was chaos. The alien ships' sensors malfunctioned, and their once precise targeting systems went haywire. Seizing the opportunity, the human fleet attacked. Small groups of ships, moving in perfect coordination, launched precise strikes at weak points in the HFY ships' hulls. The HFY retaliated with massive energy blasts, but the human ships dodged and weaved through the explosions, making it clear that this would not be an easy fight. From the ground, the world watched in disbelief as the battle unfolded. For the first time, humans weren't running or hiding. They were fighting back. Across the globe, people stood in awe of the sheer audacity of the human fleet. But even as the humans scored their first victories, the battle was only just beginning. In the HFY command center, chaos erupted as alien officers scrambled to understand what had just happened. The human fleet had turned the tables in a matter of minutes, and the invaders were unprepared for such a resilient force. "We've underestimated them," one HFY commander growled, his voice laced with disbelief. "Prepare the fleet for counterattack. They'll pay for this insolence." But the humans weren't done yet. This was only the beginning. As the battle raged on, it became clear that Earth wasn't just going to roll over and surrender. The HFY would soon learn that humanity, when backed into a corner, would rise up with a fury no one could have predicted. And the fight for Earth had only just begun. The first battle was chaotic, but the humans had shown the HFY something they hadn't expected: resilience. As the alien fleet reeled from the unexpected assault, the human ships, agile and unpredictable, continued to harass and outmaneuver them. The once dominant HFY were no longer the unstoppable force they had believed themselves to be. The tide was shifting, but both sides knew this was only the beginning. Admiral Harrow stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vanguard. His eyes never left the holographic map of the battle, watching as human ships engaged the alien forces in a deadly dance. He knew the initial skirmishes were just a warm-up. The real test was coming. The XR would soon regroup and retaliate with everything they had. "Commander Alvarez," Harrow said, his voice calm but firm. "It's time. Initiate the second phase of the plan." Alvarez nodded, her fingers flying across her console. "Aye, sir." Phase 2 initiated. All ships on standby. The humans had learned from the first clash. They had to keep the XR guessing. If they fought the invaders head-on, they'd be wiped out. Instead, they would rely on tactics that played to Earth's strengths: deception, speed, and the very environment the XR had overlooked. The planet's atmosphere, gravity, and electromagnetic fields had become their greatest allies. The human fleet split into smaller groups, each one operating independently but in sync. They began using the planet's natural features as part of their strategy. Some ships dove low into the atmosphere, skimming the ground before darting back into the clouds. Others climbed higher, taking advantage of Earth's magnetic field to distort the XR's sensors and disorient their targeting systems. It was a strategy that took the XR completely by surprise. The XR commanders tried to adjust, but their superior technology turned out to be their downfall. Their ships relied on precise targeting systems and energy-based weapons that, while incredibly powerful, were not built to handle the unpredictable nature of Earth's terrain. The more they tried to adapt, the more they found themselves at a disadvantage. "Why can't we lock onto their ships?" one XR officer screamed, slamming his fist onto his console. "Their movements are erratic. Our targeting systems can't keep up." The humans weren't just dodging blasts. They were setting traps. Using Earth's weather systems, they directed powerful storms toward the XR fleet, creating a fog of chaos that scrambled the invaders' ability to track them. In one bold maneuver, a group of human ships flew directly into a massive thunderstorm, their ships barely visible in the intense winds and rain. The XR ships tried to follow, but their energy beams fizzled out as the storm interfered with their targeting systems. In the confusion, the human ships struck. Small, fast-moving vessels darted in, launching precision missiles at weak points on the XR ships. Several smaller alien vessels were destroyed in quick succession, their debris scattering in the sky like fireflies in a summer night. Back on the ground, the world watched with a mixture of fear and hope. News outlets across the globe reported live updates, showing the humans' surprising resilience. The underdogs, once thought to be doomed, were now inflicting real damage on the alien invaders. It was a glimmer of hope, but Harrow knew the hardest part was yet to come. The XR, shocked and enraged, finally adjusted their tactics. With their advanced technology and overwhelming firepower, they began to fight back with brutal force. Massive energy beams shot from their ships, turning the sky into a battlefield of flashing lights and explosions. But even as the XR retaliated, the human fleet didn't back down. They kept moving, kept attacking, and kept fighting for every inch of sky. The invaders had underestimated humanity's determination, and now they were paying the price. Admiral Harrow's face remained stoic as he watched the battle unfold. "We've given them a taste of what Earth can do," he said, "but we can't stop here. This is just the beginning." As the sun set over the chaotic scene, one thing was clear: the humans were no longer the prey. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and the XR had made a critical mistake by underestimating them. The war was far from over, but Earth was no longer defenseless. The first wave of battles had left the XR fleet in disarray, but the invaders were far from defeated. The human ships had proven their mettle, showing the aliens that Earth wasn't going to fall as easily as they had hoped. Now the XR had to adapt, or they would risk losing everything. In the command center of the XR flagship Scareth, alien officers scrambled to assess the damage. The holographic projections of Earth's orbit flickered with new data as the remaining human ships continued their unpredictable assaults. The alien leaders' faces, once full of confidence, now showed signs of frustration. "This is unacceptable. One of the XR generals shouted, slamming a fist onto his command chair. How have these primitive humans been able to outmaneuver us? We've crushed entire fleets in seconds before. Another officer, his antennae twitching in agitation, replied, their tactics are unusual. They are using the planet's atmosphere, the magnetic fields, the storms. Their ships seem to be designed specifically to counter our technology. It's as if they studied us and tailored their defenses for this moment. The leader of the fleet, High Commander Jarek, stood at the center of the room, observing the data. His expression was unreadable. We have underestimated them, he said, his voice cold and calculating. But they are still just humans. We will crush them with force. Jarek's orders were immediate and ruthless. Deploy all available reinforcements. We will use everything at our disposal. Earth's defenses are weak, and we will break them. The XR began to regroup and bring in their full strength. They launched dozens of additional warships from their motherships, each one brimming with destructive weaponry. Massive energy cannons were readied, and fleet formations were restructured for a more direct assault. They would not make the same mistake again. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Harrow watched the unfolding situation with grim determination. The XR may have been stunned by the humans' initial resistance, but it was clear they were preparing for a much larger offensive. The human fleet had inflicted some damage, but Harrow knew that the next wave of attacks would be even fiercer. Earth's forces could not match the XR ship-to-ship power head-to-head. Commander Alvarez, Harrow said as he turned toward his trusted officer, we need to rethink our strategy. The XR are too strong for direct confrontation now. We can't keep using the same tactics. We need something new. Alvarez nodded, her brow furrowed as she began analyzing the data. Their ships rely on their superior weapons and technology, but they're vulnerable to unpredictability. The magnetic storms we used before were effective, but we can't depend on natural phenomena alone. What do you suggest? Harrow asked. We need to hit them where it hurts, but in a way they won't expect, Alvarez said, eyes lighting up with realization. It's time we turn the tables. We've been fighting them on their terms, using their weaknesses. But what if we disrupt their command structure? If we can create enough chaos within their leadership, it could break their coordination. Harrow considered the idea carefully. A disruption. But how? Alvarez smiled. We've been studying their communication networks. Their ships are tightly linked by a central system. If we can infiltrate their command channels and sow confusion among their commanders, we can create chaos in their ranks. We might even get them to fight among themselves. It was a risky plan, but Harrow knew they had no other choice. He had seen what the XR could do when they were united and focused. But if they could fracture their leadership, they might just have a chance to turn the tide. Prepare the fleet, Harrow ordered. It's time to show them that humans aren't just capable of resistance. We can make them doubt themselves. Across the battlefield, as the XR prepared for their counterattack, their arrogance began to slip. They had underestimated Earth's resilience once, but they had not yet realized how much humanity could adapt. The coming clash would not be as one-sided as they had assumed. The war was far from over, and the humans' fight for survival was about to take a dangerous turn. The XR were confident in their superiority, but as their forces gathered for their counterattack, the humans were preparing a move that would turn the tide of the war in ways the invaders couldn't have anticipated. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Admiral Harrow stood, his eyes locked on the data streams streaming across the holographic map. The plan that Alvarez had devised was bold, perhaps reckless, but it was their best shot at creating the chaos they needed to throw off the XR. The XR relied heavily on their communications and fleet coordination to maintain their superiority. If they could infiltrate their network and send the right signals at the right time, the entire command structure could collapse. If the human fleet could cause enough confusion within the XR ranks, the invaders would turn on themselves. But it was a delicate task. One wrong move, and the humans could end up helping the XR more than they harmed them. I'll be honest with you, Admiral, Alvarez said, her voice tight with focus. "This isn't going to be easy. The XR are no fools. Their encryption is strong, and their command system is layered. We'll need to get into their primary satellite uplinks to cause the most damage." Harrow nodded, his face grim but determined. "We don't have time to waste. We strike now, or we risk being overwhelmed. If we can get even a few minutes of confusion, we'll have an opening." "Understood, sir. We're ready to go." Harrow turned to face the rest of his command crew. "Initiate the infiltration plan. Begin transmission intercepts. Every ship knows their assignment." Across the fleet, the human ships split into smaller groups, each one prepared to make its move. Meanwhile, the Vanguard and a few other key ships would carry out the most dangerous part of the mission. They had to infiltrate the XR's satellite network and disrupt their long-range communication systems. As the human ships moved closer to the XR fleet, they initiated their stealth systems, which utilized low-energy emissions to minimize detection. The human fleet knew that one wrong signal, one wrong move, could alert the XR to their presence. But the element of surprise was their only hope. Commander Alvarez's fingers flew across the console, her face bathed in the soft light of the holographic display. She had spent hours studying the XR systems, looking for the vulnerabilities that would allow her to send the right kind of disruption. "We've got access," she said, her voice low but filled with excitement. "I'm into their primary uplink. Let's give them a show." With a few deft keystrokes, she sent a wave of false data across the XR communication network. It wasn't much at first, just a small glitch that would be overlooked. But it was enough to get their systems to hiccup. To the XR, it seemed like an anomaly, something that could be fixed quickly. But then, Alvarez sent another signal, a stronger one, this time aimed at their fleet's central command. The response was immediate. The XR flagship, Scarath, shuddered. Inside its command center, officers scrambled, unsure of what was happening. Communications went offline for a few critical moments, and the aliens found themselves unable to relay orders to their other ships. "Report." High Commander Jarek's voice echoed through the bridge. The XR officers were panicked, their systems showing errors and conflicting reports. The disruption had begun. Meanwhile, in space, the human fleet didn't waste any time. They launched a series of disorienting strikes at key XR vessels, targeting smaller command ships that were now vulnerable and isolated from the main fleet. As the XR scrambled to reestablish control, the humans struck fast and hard, sending shockwaves through their ranks. Admiral Harrow stood at the center of the bridge, watching the chaos unfold. "It's working," he muttered under his breath, barely believing it himself. The XR were disoriented, their once perfect coordination now splintering as the confusion spread. Without a clear command structure, the alien ships were starting to act erratically, opening themselves up to attack. "This is our chance," Harrow said, his voice steady. "Keep the pressure on. Do not let them recover." The humans were relentless. As the XR tried to recover their command systems, the human fleet kept them off balance, exploiting every opening. The invaders had underestimated the humans' ability to disrupt their operations, and now they were paying the price. But even as the XR struggled to regain control, Harrow knew they wouldn't be down for long. This battle had been a victory, but the war was far from over. The XR would adapt quickly, and when they did, the humans would need to be ready. As the first phase of the sabotage plan succeeded, Earth's fleet had gained a vital edge. The fight for survival was becoming even more dangerous, but humanity had proven that it would not go down without a fight. And now, with the XR in disarray, it was time to press the advantage. The XR were reeling. Their once impressive fleet was now in chaos, with ships firing at each other in confusion, and their command structure unable to restore order. The humans had struck hard with their sabotage, and the invaders had not recovered as quickly as they expected. This was the moment Admiral Harrow had hoped for. The humans had gained a rare advantage, and it was time to press forward. On the bridge of the Vanguard, The crew watched with bated breath as the chaos unfolded in real time. The XR ships, once so orderly and imposing, were now struggling to regain control. Some fired on each other, while others attempted to regroup. The sheer disarray was staggering. "Commander Alvarez," Harrow said, his eyes never leaving the tactical map. "Now's our chance. We need to strike their supply ships. If we can disrupt their resources, it'll take them much longer to recover." Alvarez nodded, her face focused. "Understood. We've already identified their logistics ships, and they're scattered across the battlefield. We'll need to move fast before they can establish new command networks." With the XR fleet in disarray, human ships moved swiftly, cutting through the chaos with precision. Their weapons systems, though not as powerful as the XRs, were built for flexibility and speed. In this moment, those advantages made all the difference. Human vessels, small and agile, darted toward the XR supply lines. These ships were essential to the invaders' war effort, delivering ammunition, repairs, and reinforcements. With these supply ships crippled, the XR would be forced into a protracted battle they weren't prepared for. Harrow knew that this could shift the momentum in humanity's favor permanently. The human fleet launched a series of coordinated strikes. Missiles and energy blasts hit the supply ships with incredible accuracy. One by one, the XR support vessels exploded in flashes of light, sending debris and smoke into the void of space. The humans moved with relentless efficiency, ensuring that no supply ship was left untouched. At the same time, smaller groups of human ships focused on picking off XR command ships that were still isolated. Some had been cut off from their leaders, and without communication, they were easy targets. These alien ships fell quickly, leaving even fewer XR ships in a position to respond. "Admiral," Alvarez said, glancing up from her console, "their remaining ships are being forced into defensive formations. They're scrambling to repair their systems and reestablish communication, but we're on the offensive now." Harrow allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. "We've got them. Keep up the pressure. We can't let them breathe." Back on the XR flagship Skarath, High Commander Jarek paced furiously. His eyes glowed with rage as he watched his forces disintegrate before him. His hands clenched into fists, and he growled under his breath. "This is an embarrassment," Jarek hissed. "How did we let these humans get this far?" His officers were equally unnerved. "Our fleet is fractured, sir. Communications are still down, and we've lost nearly a quarter of our supply lines. Our ships are retreating without orders." Jarek's sharp gaze turned to the holographic display, showing the remaining human ships, moving with an eerie precision, undeterred by the chaos. "This can't continue. We need to reestablish control now." But the XR were too late. The human fleet, spurred on by the disruption they had caused, pressed harder than ever. The humans' tenacity was evident in every strike, every maneuver. What had started as an act of desperation had become an overwhelming force. Back on Earth, the global news networks reported the unfolding battle in awe. People gathered in homes, workplaces, and streets, glued to the broadcasts. The underdogs, humanity, were winning. Across the world, there was a palpable sense of unity and pride, as if the entire planet had come together for a single purpose: survival. For the first time in history, humans were on the offensive against an alien invasion, and they were proving they could stand their ground. But Harrow knew this victory was not the end. The XR were a relentless force, and they would recover, adapt, and strike back. But the humans had shown them something important: that Earth was not a place to be conquered without a fight. The first steps in turning the tide of the war had been taken. The battle for Earth was no longer a one-sided affair. It had become a battle for survival, and the humans had finally proven they had what it took to win. The days that followed the initial sabotage were filled with relentless skirmishes, but the balance of the war had unmistakably shifted. The XR were scrambling, their once unshakable confidence replaced by uncertainty. The human fleet, though still outnumbered, had found its rhythm. exploiting every opportunity to strike when the invaders were vulnerable. And now, Earth's defenders had one more card to play, a plan so daring it could either bring victory or total defeat. Admiral Harrow stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring at the tactical map before him. The battle was far from over, but the human forces were holding strong. Their recent victories had begun to take a toll on the HFY. Ships that had once moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine were now scattered and reactive. They had lost critical resources, and their communications were still patchy at best. Commander Alvarez approached, her face serious. "We've successfully delayed their reinforcements, but we're running out of time. The HFY will regroup soon, and when they do, they'll come at us with everything they have. We need to finish this while they're still reeling." Harrow nodded. "I agree. It's time to execute the final phase. We need to take out their command ship." The HFY flagship, Skarath, had remained intact despite the chaos. It was the heart of their operation, and without it, the invaders would be left rudderless. But striking it wouldn't be easy. The Skarath was heavily guarded and brimming with advanced weapons. It would take more than a coordinated strike. It would take everything the humans had. The human fleet began to converge, carefully positioning themselves for the assault. Their strategy was clear. They would hit the Skarath with overwhelming force, focusing on its weak points, but the trick was to do it without leaving themselves open to retaliation. The HFY would undoubtedly counterattack with their remaining forces, and the humans would need to withstand everything the aliens threw at them while they struck their target. "We have to make this quick," Harrow said, turning to his command staff. "We have one shot at this. If we don't strike decisively, we risk losing everything." The fleet launched in formation, weaving through debris and wreckage from previous battles. Harrow watched the movement of his ships, his heart pounding with anticipation. Each ship was a vital part of the plan, from the smallest scout ships to the massive cruisers. The HFY might be powerful, but they were struggling with internal chaos, and that was their greatest weakness. Alvarez issued the final order to begin the assault. The first wave of human ships darted toward the Skarath, launching waves of missiles and energy blasts, targeting the command ship shields. The HFY fleet responded immediately, unleashing a furious barrage of fire in retaliation. But the humans were prepared. They used their speed and agility to dodge the initial salvo and continued their relentless attack. "This is it," Harrow muttered under his breath, watching as human ships made their deadly approach. "Hold steady." The Skarath's shields began to flicker under the barrage, and it became clear that the HFY had underestimated the humans' determination. It was no longer a battle of just firepower. It was a battle of willpower. The humans were proving that they could endure the impossible and strike where it mattered most. As the human ships closed in on the Skarath, Harrow watched as their concentrated fire finally breached the HFY's outer defenses. The massive flagship shuddered under the impact. Then, a massive explosion erupted from its outer hull as the shields finally gave way. The first strike had landed, and the HFY flagship was no longer untouchable. The HFY began to react in desperation, launching all remaining defensive drones and reinforcements. It was clear the Skarath's systems were faltering. Harrow felt a surge of hope. The humans were in the fight of their lives, but they were on the brink of doing what many had once thought impossible. "The flagship's core is exposed," Alvarez called out from her station. "We have one final opportunity. Full power to the main cannons. Now." Harrow's heart raced as he issued the command. The remaining human ships locked onto the exposed core of the Skarath and fired everything they had. A beam of concentrated energy surged from the Vanguard, striking the HFY flagship directly. The Skarath shook violently, its hull cracked open, and in a brilliant burst of light, it exploded. The flagship was no more. For the first time in days, there was a moment of silence across the battlefield. The HFY fleet faltered, their command ship lost. But Harrow knew it wasn't over yet. The HFY would regroup and counterattack. But the humans had proven something extraordinary. They had broken the back of the invaders' might. The tide had finally turned in humanity's favor. But the war wasn't won yet. The real test had only just begun. The destruction of the Skarath sent shockwaves through the remaining Exar fleet. It was the heart of their invasion, and without it, the invaders were vulnerable. For the first time in the war, the Exar were no longer the unstoppable force they had been when they first arrived. The human fleet, battered but unbowed, pressed forward with determination. Admiral Harrow stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the aftermath unfold. The explosion of the Exar flagship was a victory, but it had come at a high cost. The human fleet was not unscathed. Several ships were heavily damaged, their crews fighting to keep them operational. The battle was far from over, and Harrow knew the Exar would retaliate with everything they had left. "Commander Alvarez, report," Harrow ordered, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Alvarez looked up from her console, her expression tense. The Exar are reeling, but they're not giving up. They've regrouped around their remaining flagship, the Yutharn. It's heavily defended, but if we can strike at it directly, we might break their resolve entirely. Harrow nodded. The Yutharn was their last hope, the final bastion of the Exar command. If the humans could destroy it, the war could be over. But Harrow knew that attacking it head-on would be dangerous. The Exar were desperate now, and they would fight with everything they had. "We can't waste this opportunity," Harrow said. "We need to hit the Yutharn before they can fully reorganize, but we'll need to draw their fire first, create an opening." Alvarez didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll coordinate with the fleet and arrange a diversion. We'll send in the fastest ships to harry their defenses and pull their fire away from the main attack." The plan was risky, but it was their best chance. The human fleet began to spread out, dividing into smaller groups that darted in and out of the Exar defenses. Their goal was to cause chaos, to force the Exar to shift their attention away from the main assault. Every ship in the human fleet, from the smallest fighter to the largest cruiser, took part in the mission. As the human ships executed their diversion, the Yutharn loomed in the distance, a colossal figure surrounded by a protective wall of Exar vessels. It was heavily armed, and the alien fleet would defend it with everything they had. But Harrow was confident. The Exar had already been pushed to the edge, and now it was time for humanity to make its final move. "We've created the opening," Alvarez reported, her voice tight with focus. "It's now or never." The human fleet surged forward, concentrated fire targeting the Yutharn's exposed weak points. The alien flagship's defenses were formidable, but they had already been compromised in the wake of the Skarath's destruction. Harrow's orders were clear: focus on the command center, the heart of their operations. Without their central hub, the Exar would be lost. Missiles and energy beams lashed out from the human ships, striking the Yutharn's shields. Slowly, the alien vessel began to shudder, its powerful defensive systems buckling under the assault. But the Exar fought back with relentless fury. They launched counterattacks with overwhelming firepower, and their remaining warships surrounded the Yutharn, turning the battle into a desperate struggle. Harrow clenched his fists as he watched the battle unfold. The tide had shifted, but it wasn't over. Humanity had already lost too many ships and too many brave souls. But they had one last chance to finish this. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Yutharn's bridge," Harrow commanded. "We finish this now." The human fleet obeyed without hesitation, their ships pouring everything they had into a single concentrated attack on the Exar flagship. The Yutharn's shields flickered as the onslaught intensified, and soon they gave way entirely. With a deafening explosion, the Yutharn's bridge was breached, sending shockwaves through the alien vessel. But the Exar weren't ready to admit defeat. They fought harder, desperate to hold on to their invasion and their empire. They launched a final counterattack with everything left in their arsenal, but their efforts were in vain. The Yutharn was crippled, and without it, the remaining Exar ships began to falter. Command was lost. Harrow's heart raced as he watched the final moments of the battle unfold. The XHR fleet, once so formidable, was breaking apart, its ships now isolated and vulnerable. The human fleet pressed forward, delivering the finishing blows. And then, after what felt like an eternity, it was over. The XHR were defeated. The remaining alien ships either retreated into the void or surrendered, their will to fight shattered. Earth had held, and humanity had won. The invasion that had once seemed impossible to resist had been repelled. Harrow exhaled deeply, his eyes scanning the battle-scarred battlefield. The victory had come at a cost. Many lives had been lost, and the scars of war would remain. But Earth had survived. Humanity had proven that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, they would fight for their future. And in the silence of space, as the remnants of the XHR fleet drifted away, a new chapter in human history began. The story of Earth's defiance would echo through the stars for generations to come.